I step into the room, feeling a strange, unsettling calm settle over me as I close the door behind. My patient shifts in his chair, adjusting his position as if preparing for a routine session. But then he turns his gaze directly to me, his eyes flickering with something darker, something I wasn't prepared for. Without warning, he blinks slowly and says, I buried my wife in the backyard. The words hang in the air, thick and suffocating. I freeze for a moment, my mind racing to process what I've just heard. The silence that follows feels deafening, punctuated only by the faint sound of his breathing. Fast, shallow, almost trembling. I watch him intently, trying to decipher whether this is some sick joke or a cry for help. His face remains impassive, almost blank, but I catch a flicker of vulnerability, desperation, maybe guilt. I can feel the room tighten, as if the walls themselves are leaning in, waiting for my response. He breaks the silence, voice trembling. Do you judge me? I blink back, the shock rising in my throat. My mind flashes with questions I shouldn't ask, instincts I shouldn't follow. Instead, I keep my voice steady, though my pulse is pounding, a mixture of fear and professional curiosity. Why did you tell me this now? What happened? I manage, trying to maintain control, trying to understand what kind of confession I've just been handed. He shifts again, running trembling hands through his hair, and then looks away, eyes fixed on some distant point I can't see. She was too much, he mutters, voice cracking. She was always accusing me, always fighting. I couldn't take it anymore. His words are low, almost whisper-like, as if speaking too loudly might make everything real. I notice his hands clenched in a fist on his lap, knuckles white. I swallow hard. My mind spins, weighing the morality of the situation against my duty as a psychologist. I know I should remain neutral, but the gravity of his secret weighs heavily on me. He's a man who's just admitted to murder, yet somehow, beneath that, I see a fractured soul desperate for understanding, or perhaps forgiveness. I can't help but wonder what brought him here to me with such a confession, why now, and what he expects me to do with this knowledge. Have you thought about turning yourself in? I ask, voice gentle but firm, knowing the gravity of what I'm suggesting. His eyes flicker with a mixture of fear and something else, relief, maybe, or defiance. I'm not sure anymore. The lines between guilt and innocence blur as I sit there, staring at this man who has just laid bare a darkness that feels almost impossible to comprehend. He hesitates for a long moment, then whispers, I don't know. I don't know if I can live with what I did. His confession feels like a wound opened wide, raw and bleeding with every word. And I realize that in this moment, I am no longer merely a therapist listening to a patient. I am a witness to something profoundly sinister, something that could shatter everything I believe about morality, justice, and the human mind. My heart pounds so loudly I can feel it echoing in my ears, a frantic drumbeat that threatens to drown out any semblance of composure I was trying to maintain. My hand trembles uncontrollably, betraying the effort I make to keep my voice steady. I take a deep, shaky breath, and with a voice that sounds almost foreign to my own ears, I manage to ask, You really did that? The silence that follows is oppressive, thick with unspoken horrors. His eyes flicker, darting around the room as if seeking some divine sign, some justification, or a desperate plea for me to deny what I've just heard. His face is a mask of conflict, pale, strained, taut with the weight of his confession. Every muscle seems to tense, as if he's trying to contain an explosion that's threatening to burst forth at any moment. I can see the strain in his jaw, the way his lips tremble, almost as if he's trying to hold back words he's not ready to voice. I wonder if he's expecting me to recoil in horror, to condemn him outright, because that's what society would expect, isn't it? But I'm a psychologist, and I've learned that beneath the surface of the most disturbing truths lie fractured layers of pain, regret, and sometimes unimaginable suffering. I remind myself that judgment will only deepen the darkness he's already carrying. Instead, I lean forward slightly, trying to keep my own emotions in check, and I ask quietly, why? Why did you do it? His eyes flick back to me, searching, pleading for some kind of understanding. In that moment, I realize that he's not just asking about the act. He's asking if I see him as a monster, if I see him as something irredeemable. The question hangs in the air, heavy and charged with despair. I sense that what I say next will shape everything. Our conversation, his perception of me, perhaps even his willingness to face whatever comes next. He finally whispers, voice cracking, "I couldn't take it anymore." The words spill out, raw and jagged, as if he's ripping apart the walls of his own soul. And I feel a shiver run down my spine, not just from the gravity of what he's revealed, but from the strange, unsettling sadness I see lurking in his eyes. It's as if he's telling me about a battle he lost, a war within himself that he could no longer win. My mind races, trying to process the enormity of this confession. I am acutely aware that what I'm hearing is not just a story, not just a crime. It's an unraveling of a mind that's been pushed to its limits, shattered by pain, rage, perhaps even guilt that's too heavy to bear. I wonder about the woman, his wife, the life he took from her, and the darkness it must have concealed to drive him to such an extreme. And yet, amidst this chaos, I can't ignore the faint flicker of empathy that ignites within me. I see a man who's broken, not necessarily evil. I hesitate, then ask softly, "Did you bury her in the backyard?" My voice is tentative, almost a whisper, because I realize that I am venturing into territory that no one should have to reveal, certainly not to a stranger. Yet I can't turn away from the truth now. His eyes waver, and a flicker of something, shame perhaps, crosses his face. "Yes," he admits, voice barely audible. "I did." The words are a confession and a curse, a testament to a darkness I never imagined I'd face so directly. The room feels colder, heavier, as if the very air has been tainted by his secrets. I feel a vortex of conflicting emotions, fear, curiosity, a strange sense of responsibility. I know I should be professional, that my duty is to help him, to guide him through whatever darkness lies ahead. But in that moment, I'm overcome with an overwhelming urge to understand, to peel back the layers of guilt and remorse that have brought him here. I want to ask more, to delve into his motives, his pain, but I hold back. Instead, I look into his eyes and ask, "And now, do you regret it?" My voice is gentle, yet probing, an attempt to understand whether darkness has truly consumed him entirely, or if somewhere within, a flicker of remorse still survives. He looks away, silent for a long moment, then nods faintly. "Yes, I do." His confession is fragile, trembling on the edge of despair. That admission shatters something inside me, an acknowledgement of the damage, the humanity that remains even within this fractured soul. As I sit there, in that charged silence, I realize that I am no longer merely a therapist listening to a patient. I am a witness to a truth so raw and terrible that it challenges every moral boundary I hold. I feel the weight of his secret pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. I wonder how I will carry this knowledge, how it will change me, how I will reconcile what I've learned with my own sense of morality. In that quiet, I make a silent vow. Whatever comes next, I must stay grounded, listen without judgment, and remember that behind every horror lies a human being, broken and desperate for redemption, just as I am desperate to understand. The silence stretched between us, thick and oppressive, as if the very air had thickened with the gravity of his confession. I watched his eyes flicker, darting nervously around the room, searching for something, perhaps reassurance, perhaps condemnation, yet finding only the quiet weight of what he'd just shared. My mind spun, trying to process the enormity of his words, the chilling reality of a man who had, in his own quiet way, buried a secret so dark it seemed to swallow the room whole. I felt my pulse quicken, an involuntary thrill of fear paired with an undeniable curiosity. I was trained to maintain composure, to remain the steady anchor amid chaos, but inside, a storm was brewing. Every word he had spoken echoed in my mind, each detail more disturbing than the last. How he had dug that hole in the garden, how he had stared at it afterward, perhaps contemplating the finality of it all. The image was vivid, searing into my consciousness, and I wondered how I could possibly hold on to my professionalism when faced with such raw truth. He finally shifted in his seat, breaking the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think I'm a monster?" The question hung in the air, fragile and desperate, as if the mere act of voicing it might make the darkness more real, more tangible. I hesitated, though I knew my role was clear. Yet, part of me, a darker, more primal instinct, wanted to hear him, to understand the depths of his despair. I cleared my throat softly and responded, "What you've done is horrifying. I won't lie to you about that. But I also see a man carrying a burden so heavy that it has distorted his sense of morality. Tell me, what made you do it?" He looked away again, eyes fixating on a distant point, perhaps imagining the soil, the weight of the earth pressing down on him. His fingers clenched his lap, knuckles white, betraying the tension thrumming through his body. It was impulsive. I didn't mean to kill her. She threatened to leave me, said she'd destroy everything I loved. I thought I had no choice. That phrase, no choice, rattled in my mind. I wondered about the circumstances, about the voices in his head that guided his actions, the justifications he had built in the dark, silent hours. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from cold, but from the profound depth of his remorse, the crack in his veneer of indifference. "How did you feel afterward?" I asked softly, knowing that beneath the surface was a tumult of guilt, shame, perhaps even regret. He swallowed hard and met my eyes for a fleeting moment. Relieved at first, then terrified. I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining her lying there, in the earth, hearing her voice in my mind, accusing me. Sometimes I thought I might go mad. I noted the tremor in his voice, the way his hands clenched into fists, trembling as if he wanted to erase the memory, but couldn't. My own breathing felt shallow, as if I too was caught between worlds, one foot in the realm of empathy, the other teetering on the edge of the moral abyss that his words revealed. The room grew quiet again, but inside me, 1,000 questions roared silently. Was I supposed to judge him? Could I afford not to? I sensed that beneath his confession was a desperate plea for understanding, perhaps even forgiveness, though he likely wouldn't voice it aloud. I thought about the social veneer we all hide behind, the masks we wear to hide the darkness within, and I realized that his story, his secret, was a mirror held up to the shadows lurking inside every human soul. I wondered, not for the first time, how fragile the line is that separates us from those depths. As the minutes ticked by, I wrestled with my own feelings, fear, fascination, a strange sense of connection to his pain. I knew this moment would stay with me, etched into the fabric of my conscience, long after the session ended. I wondered if he felt any relief at finally unburdening himself, or if this confession had only deepened his torment. In that quiet, I made a silent vow, to sit with him without judgment, to listen as he unraveled his darkness, no matter how disturbing it was. For beneath every horror, I understood there was a human being seeking redemption, someone lost in the shadows, just like me, just like all of us. And I questioned whether the boundaries of morality could withstand the raw truth of his confession, or if, somehow, we are all capable of crossing lines we never thought possible. I sat there, heart pounding, not knowing what the coming days would bring, but certain of one thing: I would carry this secret, this darkness, with care. Not to judge, not to condemn, but to hold space for the full, terrible truth of what it means to be a human being, flawed, broken, and endlessly searching for light. I sit there, frozen in place, my mind desperately trying to make sense of what I've just heard. The room feels colder, the air heavier. My senses seem dulled, yet every detail, the faint hum of the air conditioner, the slight tremor in his voice, becomes magnified in this moment of stunned silence. My brain fights to process the enormity of his confession, that he buried his wife's body in the backyard. I can't help but feel a surge of conflicting emotions, curiosity, horror, and almost clinical detachment battling with a visceral urge to recoil. I think about the chaos that must have led him here, to this point where he's revealing something so unthinkable. Was it desperation? Fear? A moment of madness that spiraled beyond control? I catch myself trying to piece together his story, to understand the motives, the feelings that might have driven him to such an extreme act. Yet beneath those questions, a darker part of me is probing, wondering what it means, really, to judge someone in this state. Is he a monster? Or merely a broken man pushed to the edge? I remind myself that my role isn't to condemn, but to understand, to hold space for the depths of human darkness without flinching. Still, the images flicker behind my eyelids, the dirt turning moist as I imagine the act of burying her, the shovelfuls of earth covering what was once her body, now lost beneath layers of soil and secrecy. His eyes flicker with a flickering hope, perhaps seeking my reaction, perhaps begging for some shred of validation or understanding. I see the flicker of guilt that warps his features, the silent plea embedded within his gaze. I wonder if he's been living with this burden all these years, or if confessing has finally unshackled some part of him, though I doubt it, given the tremor in his voice and the tremor in his hands. My mind races to find the right response, the balance between empathy and professional detachment. I ask myself whether this moment is an opportunity for genuine healing or a dangerous abyss from which he might not return. I understand, with a sinking certainty, that this secret is a living thing, an entity that has grown and festered within him, shaping his reality in ways I cannot fully comprehend. For a moment, I imagine the ripple effect of his actions, what it means for the family, for the neighbors, for the very fabric of his life. I think about the silent witnesses to this darkness, the questions they would ask, the judgments they would cast. And I realize how fragile the veneer of civility is, how easily it can shatter when confronted with raw, brutal truth. I feel the weight of my own morality pressing down on me. Would I have done anything differently in his position? Could I ever forgive myself if I had committed such an act? The thought chills me, yet I know that these questions are irrelevant. What matters now is what he is willing to face, what he is ready to confront about himself. As silence stretches between us, I am painfully aware of the enormity of this moment. I see no judgment in my expression, only a deep, conscious effort to stay grounded. I want him to know, no matter how dark his confession, no matter how much shame or remorse he carries, that he is not alone in this darkness, that the human mind is a labyrinth filled with shadows, and sometimes the only way out is to face them, no matter how terrifying. I wonder how this will change him, how it will ripple into the future. Will he find redemption? Or will he be forever haunted by the secret he's just revealed? I doubt I'll ever have the answers, but I do know this. I will carry this moment with me, carefully, with compassion and caution, because I recognize that behind every story of horror, there's a human being seeking understanding, someone desperately trying to navigate the murky waters of their conscience. In that quiet, I silently vow to remain a steady presence, to listen without judgment, to hold space for the full truth, no matter how disturbing it may be. Because I believe, in the depths of my training and my own humanity, that even the darkest secrets can be seen in the light of compassion, and perhaps even the most fractured soul can find a way back to the surface. He looks at me again, a thin smile curling on his lips, but there's an undercurrent of challenge in his eyes that I can't ignore. His voice drops to a whisper, laced with a strange mixture of mockery and vulnerability, as if daring me to pass judgment. "You think you can judge me?" he asks, and I feel the weight of his question lingering like a thick fog in the room. For a moment, I hesitate, not because I lack the words, but because I sense that beneath his taunt lies a desperate plea for recognition, perhaps even understanding. My mind races with the implications of that confession, the dark corners I've tried to avoid, the shadows I've silently acknowledged but never truly confronted. What do I see in his eyes? A broken man desperate for validation? A monster hiding behind a fragile facade? Or simply someone lost in the labyrinth of his own guilt? I keep my face neutral, although inside, my thoughts churn fiercely. I understand the impulse to lash out, to challenge the one person who holds his secret in their hands. It's a defense mechanism, perhaps a way to mask the vulnerability I know lurks beneath that smirk. I wonder how many layers of denial he's built around himself, how many masks he's worn over the years, and how many truths he's buried deep within the earth of his backyard. His question hangs in the air as if testing the boundaries of my patience, my compassion, my judgment. I find myself grappling with that very idea. Judgment. Is it my place? Can I afford to judge him? Or am I merely an observer, a vessel for his truth, tasked only with witnessing the dark corners of his mind and heart? I choose my words carefully, knowing that this moment is fragile. No, I finally say, softly but firmly, I don't judge you. Not because I'm incapable, but because I believe that judgment isn't the answer here. What I see is a person who's carried a burden so heavy that it's reshaped him. Someone who's been trying to outrun his own conscience, perhaps, or hide from his own darkness. I see someone seeking something, perhaps redemption, perhaps forgiveness, or simply a way to accept what he's done. His eyes flicker, just briefly, as if that answer unsettles him more than I intended. I continue, choosing honesty over comfort. I won't pretend I understand everything. I don't. And I don't need to. What I do know is that hiding from your truth only extends the suffering. Facing it, no matter how terrifying, is the only way to begin healing, if healing is even possible. He leans back, eyes still fixed on me, searching for a sign of disapproval or maybe hope. I wonder what's running through his mind, guilt, defiance, fear, or perhaps a flicker of relief that someone else isn't recoiling from the darkness he's revealed. In that moment, I realize that my role isn't to judge, but to be present, to hold space for his truth, no matter how disturbing it is. Because I've learned, through years of listening and witnessing, that darkness is often a sign of pain, not inherently evil. That beneath every monstrous act, there's a human being who's lost their way, who's desperately reaching for something, any semblance of peace. I meet his gaze steadily and softly offer, "You asked if I judge you." My answer is no. I see you as a human being, flawed, scared, trying to survive. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough for now. To know that you're not alone in this, that someone is willing to listen without condemning. He looks away then, perhaps processing my words, or maybe wrestling with his own inner storm. As I watch him, I feel a strange sense of quiet resolve swelling within me. This isn't about right or wrong, about punishment or forgiveness. It's about acknowledging the complexity of human darkness and light, and understanding that sometimes the greatest act of compassion is simply being present, unjudging. I know this moment will stay with me long after the session ends. It's a reminder that even the most fractured souls carry a flicker of hope, hidden, fragile, but always waiting for someone brave enough to see past the shadows. My breath grew shallow, each inhale feeling like I was inhaling more than just air. I was ingesting the weight of his words, heavy and unyielding. The room seemed to close in around us, the quiet so thick I could hear the faint thrum of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. I hesitated, torn between my instinct to protect the boundaries of confidentiality and the stark reality that something within his confession demanded action. He stared at the floor, trembling, voice trembling more, an unsteady whisper that cut through the silence. His words spilled out, hesitant at first, then gaining momentum, revealing a secret buried beneath years of silence. I could feel my mind racing, trying to process what he was telling me, what I was hearing. It was no longer a matter of judgment or morality. It was a raw, visceral truth that challenged every fiber of my professional composure. He spoke of the backyard, how he had dug a hole one night, how he had buried her there. His voice cracked when he described the moment he covered the earth, the dirt falling back onto his hands as if he could erase what he'd done. I saw the tremor in his shoulders, the way his fingers clenched into fists as if trying to hold himself together amid the chaos of his own confession. He looked up then, eyes searching for reassurance, for an answer that would somehow absolve or condemn. The question hung in the air, trembling just like him. Do you think I should tell someone? Should I go to the police? His voice was barely above a whisper, yet behind it, I could feel the desperate hope for validation or perhaps for permission to do what he thought was right. Or maybe he just wanted someone to understand the torment he was enduring, to acknowledge the darkness that had taken root in his soul. My mind spun, the ethical dilemma pressing down like a weight I couldn't ignore. As a psychologist, I was bound by confidentiality, yet my instincts screamed that I was on the brink of a moral precipice. What if I stayed silent? What if I urged him to confess, to face whatever punishment or redemption awaited? The room felt electric with tension, an invisible line stretching tight between my duty and my moral intuition. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to speak impulsively. Instead, I looked at him, my eyes steady and calm, trying to convey a sense of neutrality even as my thoughts stormed within. I knew that whatever I chose to say next would ripple through his life, perhaps irreparably. But I also knew that silence could be just as destructive. I hear what you're saying. I finally managed, my voice low and even. And I want you to know that I am here for you, regardless of what you decide. This is complex, and I won't tell you what to do. But I also need to remind you that some things can't stay hidden forever. The truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes when we least expect it. And whether you choose to reveal it or hold on to it, I will support you in navigating whatever comes next. His shoulders slumped, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The moment stretched on, heavy with unspoken questions and fears. I could see the battle raging behind his eyes, between the urge to confess and the fear of what that might mean. Every fiber of my being urged me to do something, to intervene, to push, to protect. Yet, I knew that the only thing I could do was remain present, a steady anchor in his storm. As I watched him, I felt the quiet resolve solidify within me. I had seen darkness in many forms before, but this was something uniquely raw and unfiltered. I understood, in that moment, that my role wasn't to judge or to fix, but simply to witness. To hold space for this fractured, desperate soul as he grappled with the enormity of his secret. The silence lingered, thick and heavy, and I wondered, how many more nights would he carry this burden? How much longer could he sustain the weight of his guilt? I knew that whatever decision he made, he would need time to face his truth, to find some semblance of redemption or peace. And I promised myself that I would be there, even if the road ahead was shrouded in darkness. My mind drifted to the moral crossroads that lay ahead. Should I report him? Should I urge him to come forward? Or was that an abandonment of the trust that had somehow formed between us? The ethical wires tangled within me, each path fraught with consequences I could neither predict nor fully understand. In the end, I realized that there was no clear right answer. Only the truth of what I felt, compassion, concern, and a silent hope that somehow the darkness could be met with understanding, not rejection. That even in the deepest shadows, human beings could find the faintest glimmer of light, if only someone was brave enough to see it. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, feeling the flicker of internal chaos threaten to spill over. I tried to mask it, to hold back the storm of conflicting emotions swirling inside me. My mind drifted unbidden to my own losses. My wife's face, the sound of her voice, the way my world had shifted irreparably the day she was taken from me. That pain, raw and unrelenting, felt like a distant echo compared to the darkness I was now faced with. It was a reminder of how thin the line is between understanding and judgment, between empathy and condemnation. As I listened to him, I could sense the tremor in his voice, an almost imperceptible quiver that betrayed the depth of his despair. His words spilled out hesitantly at first, then with a growing desperation that made my skin crawl. He spoke of burying her body, of hiding her in the yard behind his house, like it was some macabre secret he couldn't leave behind. I felt my stomach tighten as he revealed the details. How he had dug deep in the earth. How he had covered her with soil as if that could somehow erase what had happened. His gaze flickered anxiously, searching for my reaction, for validation or condemnation, as if my judgment might condemn him to an eternity of guilt or set him free. In that moment, I saw the fractured soul beneath his trembling exterior. His eyes darted around the room, flickering with fear and shame, like a hunted animal caught in the glare of a predator. I wondered how much of his confession was rooted in remorse, and how much was driven by the madness of his own guilt. Every word he uttered felt like a fragile thread, holding him together while threatening to unravel him entirely. My thoughts raced. How could I respond? How could I navigate this moral labyrinth without losing my own footing? The ethical questions spun wildly in my mind. Should I report him? Would that serve justice, or would it shatter whatever fragile trust had formed between us? Was it my place to judge, or to simply listen and bear witness? I knew that whatever came next, I couldn't afford to turn away from his raw vulnerability, nor could I allow my own feelings of revulsion or pity to cloud my judgment. I felt a tremor of empathy, deep, almost visceral. I remember my wife's smile, her warmth, her laughter, how life had once seemed so full of promise, so innocent. Now, that memory felt like a fragile glass ornament, ready to shatter at any moment. I wondered if he felt a similar ache, this relentless, gnawing remorse that had turned his heart to stone. Was he seeking forgiveness, or merely trying to justify the unthinkable? I couldn't tell, but I knew that beneath his words lay a plea for understanding, an attempt to make sense of the chaos within. The room grew thick with silence again, and I sensed that we had reached a precipice. I could see the battle raging within him, the desire to unburden himself versus the terror of facing the consequences. I felt the weight of my own moral compass, torn between compassion and an instinct to protect the vulnerable from further harm. Yet, I also knew that true compassion sometimes meant witnessing the darkness without turning away, even when it threatened to consume us. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. My hands clenched involuntarily, not from anger or disgust, but from a conflicted sense of responsibility. If I told someone, if I acted, would I be condemning him forever? Or was silence itself a form of complicity? His eyes finally met mine, pleading silently for some recognition, some sign that he wouldn't be judged outright. I saw the hope flicker there, fragile and fleeting, like a candle in a windstorm. I realized then that my role wasn't to pass judgment, but to remain present, steadfast and unwavering, to hold space for his confession, no matter how dark or unfathomable it was. Because it was in that darkness that I saw the potential for redemption, for change, for the smallest shard of light to emerge from the shadows. And as I sat there, contemplating the moral abyss before me, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever decision I made, it would be driven by compassion, by the hope that even in the depths of despair, there might be a flicker of humanity worth saving. I owed him that much, at least, a chance to face his own darkness, and perhaps, in some distant tomorrow, find his way back into the light. When I open my eyes, his face greets me, not the usual flicker of guilt or shame, but an almost unsettling calm, as if he's testing my limits, daring me to crack under the weight of his revelation. I feel the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere, a quiet challenge wrapped in silence, and I brace myself knowing that beneath that surface, something darker lurks, something I might not be prepared to face. His trembling voice breaks the fragile stillness, slicing through the quiet like a shard of glass. He speaks slowly at first, almost hesitant, but then the words gain weight, and I realize he's revealing more than I could have imagined. The confession spills out, a gruesome detail buried beneath his backyard, a secret he's kept hidden, perhaps even from himself, for years. He talks about the earth swallowing her, about the shadows cast by guilt that have never left him, haunting every waking moment. I watch him closely, noting every tremor, every flicker of emotion that escapes his lips. His eyes dart around the room, searching for something: validation, condemnation, or perhaps just a flicker of understanding in my gaze. His gaze is raw, unfiltered, and dangerous in its honesty. In that moment, I realize that I am not just a therapist. I am a witness to a fractured soul unraveling beneath the weight of his own darkness. The silence stretches, thick and oppressive, and I feel my own pulse quicken. I wonder how much I can hold, how much I should hold. Part of me screams to report him, to sever the connection and walk away from this abyss. But another part, the part that's seen too many fractured lives to judge so lightly, whispers that I must remain present, grounded. That sometimes the most difficult act of compassion is to sit still amidst chaos and listen without recoiling. He looks at me then, and I see not just a man confessing a crime, but someone desperate to be seen. Not as a monster, but as a human drowning in his own guilt. His eyes search for my reaction, and I know that whatever I say next will cement the fragile trust between us or shatter it forever. The temptation to recoil, to judge, to condemn, pulses hard inside me. But I resist. Instead, I lean in slightly, trying to meet him where he is in that dark, trembling space. I feel the enormity of what he's shared pressing down, suffocating even, yet I remind myself that my role isn't to judge, but to hold space. To acknowledge his pain, his guilt, his remorse, no matter how visceral or disturbing. I ask myself, what would be more harmful? To turn away in horror or to stay, to listen, and to try to understand the complex web of his conscience? I choose the latter, knowing full well that this choice will shape what comes next. His confession is a heavy stone dropped in the middle of the room, ripples spreading outward, disturbing the calm I desperately cling to. I see the tension in his body, the way his hands tremble slightly as he waits for my response. I know that his words have opened a Pandora's box of guilt and shame that he's carried in silence for years. To confront this is to face the abyss. Yet I also recognize that silence in the face of such darkness can be an accomplice to further suffering. I search for a way to respond that doesn't betray my own shock, my own visceral urge to recoil. I want to tell him that I don't judge him, that I see the pain behind his eyes, the torment within his soul. But words fail me, so I settle for a quiet nod, an acknowledgement that this is a moment of profound vulnerability. I do not promise forgiveness or understanding. Perhaps neither is possible, but I do promise presence. As the moment stretches, I realize that I am standing at the edge of something much larger than a typical therapy session. I am on the cusp of an intricate dance between human darkness and the fragile hope for redemption. I wonder how many more layers of his story I am yet to uncover, how much more of his soul I must navigate. And yet, I remain firm in my resolve to stay, to listen, to bear witness. Because I know that sometimes the greatest act of compassion is simply to hold space, no matter how terrible the truth, no matter how much it threatens to undo us. And I also understand that within this darkness, there might still be a sliver of light, small, fragile, perhaps hidden beneath layers of shame and guilt, but enough to give him a chance, a glimmer of hope. I owe him that much, at least, to stand with him in his darkness, and in doing so, maybe help him find a way back toward some distant, elusive dawn. My body tensed involuntarily, a shiver creeping down my spine that I couldn't quite quell. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls pressed in closer, eager to contain the weight of his confession. My mind drifted unbidden to my own wife, her smile, her touch, the gentle rhythm of our shared mornings, only to be abruptly pulled back to the present by the tremor in his voice. Was it genuine? Or was this a calculated lie, a desperate attempt to manipulate, to shock, to elicit some response from me? His words echoed in my mind. I buried her in the backyard. The phrase hung there, grotesque and surreal, a dark seed lodged deep in my consciousness. I wondered if I was merely imagining the trembling in his tone, or if it was real, if, in some twisted way, he was exposing a truth he could no longer contain. As he spoke, his eyes darted nervously around the room, flickering with a mixture of shame, fear, and perhaps something darker, regret tangled with dread. Was he expecting me to judge him, to condemn? Or was he seeking something else entirely, perhaps validation, perhaps an acknowledgement that he was not alone in his darkness? The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing down on me. How much of this was genuine? How much was manipulation? And, most haunting of all, what was the truth behind his confession? I wanted to reach out, to offer some reassurance, to tell him that whatever his actions, whatever secrets he kept buried in that backyard, he was still a human being deserving of compassion. But words faltered, caught somewhere between my mind and my throat. Instead, I sat still, listening, allowing the heavy air to settle around us. In that suspended moment, my thoughts spiraled to memories of my own wife, her scent, her laugh, the quiet nights we'd shared. I wondered if I was projecting, if my mind was trying to find some mirror in his confession to justify my own fears and guilt. Or perhaps I was simply trying to comprehend the unimaginable, a man who had crossed a line so dark that it defied rational understanding. Did I believe him? Was this an elaborate deception woven by a fractured mind? Or was it the raw truth, ugly and unfiltered? I realized that the room had dissolved into a space of moral ambiguity, where judgment seemed both inevitable and impossible. The lines between right and wrong blurred, and I grappled with the unsettling knowledge that sometimes the most human response wasn't to judge but to stay, to listen, to witness. Because I understood that underneath the veneer of shame and remorse, there might be a fragile core, a flicker of remorse, a whisper of regret, that could someday be nurtured into something more hopeful. The questions nagged at me. How much of his story was rooted in genuine remorse? Could he live with the weight of what he'd admitted? Or was he still trying to construct a narrative that eased his conscience? I knew I wouldn't get answers today. Instead, I felt a quiet resolve forming, to remain present, to hold space for his pain, however dark it was. Perhaps, in that silent steadiness, I might offer some small measure of safety, a place where he could confront his truth without fear of rejection. As I looked at him, I saw not just a man confessing a terrible deed, but a fractured soul seeking redemption, or perhaps simply seeking acknowledgement. I understood that sometimes the bravest act in therapy isn't to resolve or fix, but to simply bear witness, to sit with someone in their darkness and offer a sliver of light. Because I knew that within that darkness, if I looked closely enough, there might still be a faint glimmer, an ember waiting to be fanned into a small but persistent flame of hope. And so I stayed. I didn't speak immediately because I understood that words at this moment might be hollow. Instead, I leaned in slightly, my gaze steady but gentle, offering him the unspoken assurance that whatever secrets he carried, whatever darkness lurked beneath his skin, he was not alone in this. That's what I could give him, presence. And perhaps, in that presence, the faintest chance for some measure of peace to seep through the cracks of his fractured story. I sat in silence, letting the weight of his confession settle over us like a dense fog. The room felt colder, the air thick with unspoken truths. I watched his face, noting the subtle tremor in his jaw, the way his fingers twitched as if trying to grasp onto something solid. I knew he was testing my reaction, playing a dangerous psychological game that only he understood. His eyes flicked toward me, then away, as if gauging whether I would recoil or remain steady. He finally broke the silence, voice trembling but deliberate. "I buried her body in the backyard," he said softly, as if confessing a mundane secret, but the words hit me like a blow. I could feel my pulse quicken, but I kept my face neutral, my breathing even. Inside, a storm churned, an amalgamation of shock, curiosity, and a primal urge to know more. Yet, I knew better than to show any outward signs of judgment or surprise. This was his truth, messy and terrifying as it was. He leaned back slightly, a faint smirk curling the corner of his mouth, a gesture that felt out of place, almost mocking. Was he amused by my reaction? Was this some twisted attempt to see if I would break? I fought to keep my gaze steady, to not let that flicker of amusement or defiance show. Instead, I focused on his eyes, trying to decipher the message behind their darting movements. Were they pleading for understanding, or were they defying the moral boundaries that I, as a therapist, was supposed to uphold? "Do you want me to judge you?" he asked then, his voice laced with challenge, as if daring me to condemn him outright. His words, however, carried a faint tremor that betrayed his vulnerability. I understood that beneath his provocative question lay a desperate need for validation, that even in the depths of his darkness, he sought acknowledgement, perhaps even a sliver of mercy. I paused, contemplating how to respond. I was painfully aware that any immediate answer might do more harm than good. My role was not to accuse or absolve, but to sit with him in his confrontation with himself. I didn't want to feed his game, yet I also recognized that this moment might be one of the rare instances where honesty could serve as a catalyst for genuine growth or destruction. "I don't think I can judge you," I finally said, softly, carefully choosing my words. "What I can do is listen and try to understand what led you here. Whatever it is, you carry it. It's yours to own." My voice was steady, unwavering. I hope my tone conveyed compassion without condoning, understanding without approval. He looked at me for a long moment, eyes searching, perhaps seeking reassurance or reckoning. Then he broke into a hollow laugh, a low, bitter sound that seemed to echo in the empty space between us. "You're supposed to judge," he murmured, almost to himself. "That's what people like you are for, isn't it?" I felt a pang of sadness, then an awareness of how much he longed for condemnation, how he might be trying to push me away or test whether I would truly accept him. His defiance was a shield, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of control amid the chaos he had unleashed. For a moment, I considered pushing back, challenging his bravado, but I chose instead to remain silent. Silence, I knew, could be a powerful response, an invitation to sit in the discomfort, to face the reality he had buried beneath the earth, beneath layers of denial and remorse. I saw how he clenched his fists, how his breathing grew shallow, and I understood that beneath his bravado or mockery lay a fragile man on the edge of breaking. The room grew heavier. I felt the enormity of the burden he carried, the shame intertwined with the guilt, the despair wrapped in the facade of defiance. My mind raced through the possibilities, how to help him carry this weight, how to guide him just a little closer toward the possibility of redemption, whatever that might look like for him. In that stillness, I realized that my presence was perhaps the only thing holding him together at that moment. Not my words, not my judgments, but my unwavering, steady gaze, my silence. These were the anchors in his tumultuous sea. I understood then that sometimes the greatest act of therapy was to simply remain, to be present in the shadows of his darkest secrets, offering him a silent space where he might, just might, begin to confront the truth he had buried in the earth, in himself. And as I continued to sit there, absorbing his trembling confession, I knew that this moment was not about morality or legality. It was about trust, an almost imperceptible thread woven through the chaos, fragile but real. My role was to be the witness, to hold the silence, to offer a sanctuary, even if only for a fleeting instance, where he could stand in the aftermath of his own darkness and wonder if perhaps, someday, he might find a way back to the light. A cold shiver ran down my spine as I imagined his backyard, the dark, silent space where he claimed he had buried her. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to picture the scene. The soil, the trembling hands, the weight of that secret pressing down on him. I could hear the faint scrape of shovel against earth in my mind, a sound so stark and visceral that it seemed to echo inside my skull. I wondered if anything truly remained beneath the soil, if the darkness had claimed her entirely, or if some fragment of her essence still lingered underground, hidden from the world. I shook my head slightly, trying to dismiss the intrusive image, but it lingered stubbornly. I felt the prickling of goosebumps along my arms, a physical response I couldn't ignore. How often does the mind wander into the depths of horror? I wondered. How often do we push beyond the boundaries of what's comprehensible, into terrains that threaten to unravel us? His trembling voice interrupted my thoughts, a fragile, broken whisper that seemed to carry the weight of the grave he had dug, both literal and metaphorical. His words were slow, deliberate, as if he had rehearsed them in a lifetime of silence. The confession hung between us like a noose, tight, inescapable. I studied him carefully, noting how his hands clenched repeatedly, as if trying to grasp some semblance of control. His eyes darted around the room, flickering between the ceiling and the floor, seeking reassurance or perhaps an escape route from the truth he had just laid bare. I could feel the tension thickening, a palpable force pressing against my chest. The room was no longer just a space for dialogue. It had become a cavern echoing with unspoken fears, secrets that threatened to swallow us both. I wondered, what had driven him to this point? Was it remorse, despair, or an unshakable conviction that this was the only way to contain his guilt? I kept my gaze steady, recognizing that any flicker of judgment might fracture what fragile trust had been built. In that moment, I was acutely aware that my role extended beyond listening. I was a witness to his darkness, a silent guardian of his vulnerability. I thought about the weight of that responsibility, how my presence, my non-reactive silence, might serve as the only refuge he had from himself. I didn't want to turn away, to offer condemnation, because I understood how easily the truth could become a weapon, a chain that bound him tighter. I wondered if he believed in the possibility of redemption, or if he was simply trying to hold the pieces of himself together long enough to survive. My mind raced to find the right words, words that would not judge, but perhaps gently steer him towards some form of acknowledgement, some sliver of hope that did not deny the enormity of what he had done. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear the faint rustle of his clothes as he shifted in his chair, the subtle tremor in his breath. I refused to fill the void with empty reassurances. Instead, I offered him the space to sit with his secrets, to confront them in his own time. Because I knew that the most profound healing often began in the quiet acceptance of what lay beneath the surface, whether buried in soil or hidden within the depths of the human soul. As I sat there, pondering his words, I felt the boundary between therapist and patient blur. There was no judgment here, only the fragile hope that perhaps confronting the darkness was the first step toward some distant, uncertain light. I wondered if he could see it too, that faint glimmer in the shadows, or if he had already surrendered to the darkness, convinced that it was the only home he had left. My thoughts spiraled around that image of the backyard, the soil, the hole, the buried secret. Was it just a metaphor, or had he truly committed something unspeakable? The very idea made my stomach churn, yet I knew better than to turn away. I needed to remain present, to hold the space for his truth, no matter how horrific it was. And so, I stayed quiet, my gaze unwavering, knowing that sometimes the act of simply listening was the most profound gesture I could offer. The weight of his secret pressed against us both, but in that shared silence, I hoped the faintest possibility of redemption lingered, like a fragile seed planted in the darkness, waiting for light to break through. I sat there, watching him shift in his chair, each movement laced with an undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite decipher. His hands clenched and unclenched, veins prominent against his skin, betraying a restless agitation that seeped into the air between us. I kept my gaze steady, unwavering, because I knew that beneath his restless exterior lurked something far more unsettling, something he might not even fully understand himself. He took a shaky breath, and I noticed his pupils flicker slightly, darting around as if seeking an escape route in the room. When he finally looked at me, his eyes held a mixture of desperation and defiance, almost pleading for some form of judgment or absolution. But I refused to give either. Instead, I allowed the silence to stretch, thick and heavy, because I understood well that sometimes words only serve to obscure what needs to be faced. Then, quite suddenly, he leaned forward, voice barely more than a whisper, but with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "I buried her in the backyard," he said, voice trembling, "my wife. She's beneath the ground there." I felt my stomach tighten, not out of shock alone, but because I knew what those words signified, an act so profound that it seemed almost mythic, yet it was his reality. I kept my expression composed, though inside my mind raced. I wondered how much of what he told me was truth, and how much was a fragment of guilt twisted by his own mind. I observed his face, pale, sweat beading on his forehead, mouth trembling as if he wanted to say more, but was chained by the weight of silence. I had to be careful not to jump to conclusions, not to allow my own reactions to betray my curiosity or horror. Instead, I focused on the subtle shifts in his posture, the tiny gestures that might reveal more than words ever could. Then he looked at me, eyes searching desperately for some indication of how I would perceive his revelation. "Do you think I'm crazy?" he asked, voice cracking under the strain. It was a question that cut deep, one loaded with the fear of judgment, of condemnation. But I chose to meet it differently. I leaned slightly forward, keeping my voice calm and measured. "I don't think anything about you right now, except that you're hurting. Whatever the story is, it's yours. My job isn't to judge, but to understand what brought you here." I saw his shoulders relax, just a fraction, though the shadows in his eyes remained dark and unreadable. Still, I could sense the internal battle raging within him. The guilt, the shame, perhaps even the insanity he feared he might fall into. His trembling hands betrayed his attempt at control, and I knew that beneath the surface a storm brewed, a storm I could only hope to navigate carefully. And in that moment, I pondered the boundaries of morality, of what it meant to help someone who had committed actions so unthinkable. Did the act of confession serve as a form of catharsis, or was it just the opening of a door to further darkness? I remembered all the cases I'd seen, the moments when understanding was born from simply holding space for pain, no matter how grotesque it was. I wondered if I was prepared for what would come next, or if I was merely a witness to a story that might never truly be understood, only endured. His voice broke again, softer now. "Do you judge me?" he asked, eyes shimmering with unshed tears. That question stirred something primal within me, an instinct to condemn, to punish, to cast him away. But I suppressed it, knowing that to do so would only deepen his despair. Instead, I responded gently. "I listen. That's all I can do." His eyes flickered with a flicker of something. Hope, regret, or perhaps just the faintest thread of relief. I couldn't tell which, but I knew this moment was a turning point. His truth was laid bare, and now it was up to us both to face its implications, whether in the safety of therapy or in the silence of the shadows that lingered just beyond reach. I wonder, then, if the soil in his backyard was truly holding her, or if it merely held his secrets, a buried history that refused to be excavated, no matter how much he wished to forget. As I sat there, I realized that the darkness had become tangible, woven into the fabric of his confession. And I wondered, with a mixture of dread and curiosity, what would happen next, if the roots of guilt would ever be pulled free, or if they would continue to grip him in a silent, suffocating embrace. As I sat there, the room seemed to shrink around me, walls pressing inward as if the very air was thickening with unspoken truths. I felt my mind race, grappling with the enormity of what he'd just revealed, the image of him digging into the earth, the weight of the soil pressing down on his shoulders, the quiet resignation in his voice. My thoughts flickered between compassion and a dark curiosity I was reluctant to admit. My moral compass felt like a fragile thread, wavering under the weight of his confession. How much of his story was a crime, and how much was just a man lost in his own darkness? I wondered if my role was to judge, if that was my place, or if I was simply to bear witness, to hold the cracks in his psyche, no matter how unsettling they became. He looked at me, expectant, perhaps searching for a verdict, a sign that I understood or condemned. I could see in his eyes a desperate hope that I'd interpret his actions as monstrous or perhaps seek to absolve him. But I knew that neither response would serve him here. Instead, I chose silence, an act of acknowledgement of respect for the unspeakable weight he carried. Yet, as I listened, a part of me was unraveling. My mind darted back to my own boundaries, my own moral lines. Would I be able to sit with such darkness without crossing into judgment? Was it ethical to simply listen, to contain his secret without offering condemnation or salvation? I hesitated, feeling the thin line. I walked between empathy and moral conflict. The room's shadows seemed to deepen, mirroring the darkness that now filled the space between us. I wondered how many more layers there were. What else lurked beneath the surface of his confession? Was this just the tip of the iceberg, or had he already buried far more than he admitted? I thought about the soil in his backyard, whether it cradled her remains, or merely concealed his own buried guilt, an emotional grave he was afraid to unearth. My sense of morality was tested like never before. I questioned whether my duty was to judge or to understand, and I sensed that doing either might threaten my own sense of integrity. The boundaries between the ethical and the monstrous blurred in this moment, and I felt an uncomfortable thrill, part curiosity, part dread, at the possibilities of what lay ahead. In that silence, I realized that whatever I thought I knew about morality was fragile, brittle, even arbitrary. This was no longer about right or wrong. It was about the raw, unfiltered truth of human darkness. And I wondered, could I remain true to myself while navigating this abyss? Or would I, unwittingly, become complicit in his secrets, in the shadows he refused to release? The tension in the room was suffocating. I could feel the thin veneer of civility cracking, exposing something primal beneath, something that questioned everything I held to be moral. As much as I wanted to pull back, to create distance from this nightmare, I knew I had to stay, to confront the moral abyss head-on, even if it meant risking my own sense of righteousness. Because in the end, isn't that what therapy is? An excavation of darkness, a confrontation with the unthinkable, without judgment, without absolution. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was teetering on the edge of something far more complex, far more dangerous. And I wondered whether I was prepared for what that might reveal about him, about myself, about the fragile boundaries of morality we cling to in the face of human darkness. He looked at me with that inscrutable smile, the one that seemed to hide 1,000 secrets behind its subtle curve. It was an expression I'd come to recognize, enigmatic, layered, almost predatory in its calm. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, not from fear, but from the unsettling realization that he knew exactly how vulnerable I was in this moment. My palms itched, beads of sweat forming despite the cool air in the room. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to ask him what he was thinking, to push him further into his darkness. His smile stretched just a little more, as if he enjoyed the effect he was having on me. I struggled to maintain eye contact, but my gaze flickered, betraying my unease. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick and oppressive, and I sensed that whatever boundaries I thought I could hold, those lines I believed kept me safe, were perilously close to dissolving. I'd seen many things in my career. I'd heard stories of trauma, salvation, despair. But this was something entirely different. It wasn't just the confession of a crime. It was the admission of something primal, something deeply rooted in darkness I'd never fully encountered before. I kept telling myself that I was there to understand, to help, to guide, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was peering into a chasm I might not be able to close once I looked inside. My heart pounded, not out of fear for myself, but because I sensed that acknowledging what he'd just revealed, burying his wife in the backyard, could shatter the fragile veneer of my professional detachment. I felt as if I hovered on the edge of a moral precipice, scrutinizing his face for clues, trying to decide whether I should condemn him or search for the reasons behind his actions. The question he posed afterward, simple and direct, "Do you judge me?" cut through my thoughts like a blade. I hesitated, The words caught somewhere between my conscience and my training. Part of me wanted to recoil, to condemn, to cast him out of my mind forever. But another part, more cautious, more curious, wanted to understand, to unravel this tangled knot of guilt and remorse that seemed to gnaw at his soul. I looked into his eyes, tried to find some flicker of remorse or regret. Instead, I saw that inscrutable smile again, knowing that he was aware of my internal conflict. That smile felt like a taunt, a reminder that he possessed knowledge I would never fully grasp, secrets that belonged entirely to him. In that moment, I realized I was no longer just a healer. I was a witness to a darkness that threatened to consume both of us. Could I remain impartial, or would this confession entangle me in his guilt? I wondered if I was simply a mirror, reflecting his sin or perhaps his own haunting truth. I knew that whatever I said next could alter the course of this conversation, and maybe my understanding of morality itself. I took a slow breath, tried to steady my trembling hands, and settled into a measured tone. I'm here to listen. I managed, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. But that doesn't mean I condone. His smile deepened, almost knowing, as if he appreciated my restraint. And I knew then that I was caught in a delicate dance, teetering between judgment and understanding, between the boundary of what is human and what is monstrous. I wondered how much of myself I could afford to lose in this process, and whether I was prepared for the truths he still held beneath his surface, truths that might threaten to unravel everything I thought I knew about morality, about myself. The weight of his confession pressed down on me like an unyielding stone, suffocating in its silent gravity. I felt my breath hitch, the air thick with unspoken horrors, and my voice, usually steady, escaped as little more than a whisper. "Why did you tell me this?" I asked, my words trembling, each syllable heavy with the dread I was trying to suppress. He hesitated, the tremor in his voice unmistakable now, as if the truth had become a living thing, writhing beneath his skin. His eyes flicked away from mine, darting toward some distant, invisible point, seeking refuge in shadows only he could see. There was a flicker of vulnerability there, or perhaps a desperate attempt to cling to some sense of control amid the chaos of his own mind. The room grew colder, or maybe it was just the chill that spread through my bones as I watched him grapple with the enormity of his own disclosure. I couldn't deny that my mind raced, trying to piece together the man sitting before me, the man who had just laid bare a darkness so profound that it threatened to swallow us whole. I wondered if he understood the implications of his words, if he truly grasped how deeply they would reverberate within me. The lines between therapist and confidant blurred in that moment, and I felt the thin thread of morality stretch tighter, strained under the weight of his secret. Inside, I was torn, caught between the impulse to judge and the desire to understand. Was this an act of madness, or merely a fragmentation of some deeper, unspoken pain? My training urged restraint, but the visceral shock of the revelation made my throat tighten, my thoughts whirl. I looked into his eyes again, willing him to continue if he dared, though part of me wanted to retreat, to run from the darkness he had just unleashed. Instead, I kept my voice as composed as I could muster, though I knew it sounded fragile. "Because you trust me," I whispered, unsure if that was enough, if that was what I truly believed. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and I saw the flicker of a broken man trying to hold himself together. My mind raced. What would I do with this knowledge? How would I process it? Was I now complicit in his silence or his shame? 1,000 questions flooded my thoughts, each more disturbing than the last. I wondered if I was merely an observer, or if I had become a part of this fractured narrative, entangled in the very darkness I was supposed to understand and contain. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, until I finally drew a breath that felt like it would shatter me. I needed to break through this moment, to find some sliver of clarity amid the chaos. "Your secret," I finally managed, voice barely above a whisper. "It's heavy. It's yours to carry," but I hesitated, knowing my next words could alter everything. You need to understand that confession, it changes everything. His eyes flicked back to mine, a hint of something unreadable lurking behind that inscrutable facade. I realized then, perhaps too late, that I was no longer just a therapist. I was a witness, an unwilling participant in a story darker than I had ever imagined, and I wondered if I had the strength and the morality to navigate what came next. As I sat there, the room seemed to shrink around me, the air thickening with the scent of unspoken horrors. His trembling voice wove a tapestry of darkness, each word revealing a fragment of a nightmare I had never dared imagine. I felt my stomach tighten, a visceral reaction to the confession that hung between us. Something so grotesque, so obscene, that the very fabric of my moral universe seemed to tear at the edges. He told me about the night, how he had dug a shallow grave in the damp earth of his backyard, the dirt caked beneath his nails, the sweat and tears mingling as he buried her, as if burying the memory might somehow bury the guilt. His voice cracked as he described the weight of the deed, the way the earth had swallowed her as if it could contain the horror, the way his own soul felt buried alive beneath layers of shame. I struggled to keep my face neutral, though inside I was unraveling, piece by piece. My mind raced to process what I was hearing. How many layers of darkness could fill a person's heart? What kind of mind could conceive such an act? And what kind of remorse could possibly follow? I wondered if his remorse was genuine or just a mask for deeper, unspoken truths. His eyes flicked to the window, avoiding mine, searching for some kind of absolution or punishment that I couldn't give. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. Was I supposed to judge him? Did I have the right? Or was I merely an observer, trapped in a voyeuristic nightmare I couldn't escape? The question echoed in my mind. What did I really know about the darkness lurking behind that confession? Could I even call it evil? Or was it something else? Something incomprehensible, insidious, and utterly human? My thoughts spiraled into chaos. I thought about morality, about the thin line separating sanity from madness. Was his confession a cry for help, a testament to guilt so profound it had driven him to this act? Or was it a lie, a twisted story crafted to shield him from the only thing worse, truth? I wondered if I should confront him, challenge him, or simply listen and hold space for whatever darkness emerged. The silence between us grew oppressive, almost alive, pulsating with the weight of what had been said. I could feel the boundaries of my own conscience stretching, threatening to snap. I questioned whether I was equipped to handle what I was hearing, whether this would shatter my sense of morality, my sense of self. My mind kept circling back to one terrifying thought. What if I was complicit just by listening? What if, by hearing him out, I was allowing the darkness to seep into my own soul? I inhaled slowly, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. The words I wanted to say felt inadequate, trivial against the enormity of his secret. I knew I had to respond carefully, cautiously, something that acknowledged the weight without judgment, without condemnation. That's a heavy burden, I finally managed, voice trembling slightly. The truth can be a prison or a liberation, but it's always a transformation. The words sounded hollow even as they left my mouth. Inside, a storm was raging. Fear, curiosity, disgust, and a strange, morbid fascination that I couldn't ignore. I looked into his eyes again, searching for some flicker of remorse, some sign that he was still human beneath the layers of darkness he had revealed. But what I saw was something colder, an abyss, perhaps, or a void where his conscience once resided. I wondered if this confession had freed him or chained him tighter to his guilt. In that moment, I realized I was no longer just a therapist. I was a witness, an unwilling participant in a narrative so twisted that it threatened to consume us both. The question persisted. Could I stay detached, keep my moral compass intact, or would I, inevitably, get pulled into the depths of his darkness? My mind was a whirlwind of questions about justice, morality, survival, and I knew that whatever came next, the line had already blurred beyond recognition. I sat there, silent, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me like a suffocating shroud. The room grew darker, the shadows lengthening as I grappled with my own shadow, questioning whether I could ever truly separate myself from this moment, from this darkness I had glimpsed. And as I looked at him, I wondered if he knew what he had unleashed, or if he was just another victim of his own internal chaos. The only certainty I felt was that I was now forever changed, haunted by the knowledge of what lurked beneath the surface of human concealment, a darkness that, once revealed, could never truly be hidden again. As he finally pushes back from the chair, the room feels somehow colder, the silence stretching long and sharp between us. I watch him rise, every movement tentative, as if he's trying to escape the weight of what he's just said but cannot. My eyes follow his hesitant steps, my mind still spinning with the enormity of his confession, an act so profoundly dark that I wonder if I've stepped into a space where morality itself tilts and twists beyond recognition. He moves toward the door, his hands trembling slightly as he reaches out for the handle, and I remain perfectly still, frozen in the quiet storm of my thoughts. The air feels thick, laden with the scent of unspoken truths and the ghost of what I've just learned. I feel the pulse of my own heartbeat, loud and unrelenting in the stillness, pounding a steady rhythm of disbelief and internal conflict. As he pauses, hand on the doorframe, I consider asking him what compelled him, what darkness took root so deep that it pushed him to bury her in the backyard. But words seem insufficient now, inadequate to grasp the shadows swirling in his mind or the abyss I glimpse behind his eyes. I wonder if he truly sees himself as a monster, or if he's simply lost in the maze of his own guilt, unable to find the exit. The silence stretches further, almost a living entity, pressing against my senses. I think about my role, how I'm supposed to respond, how I am meant to hold this secret without it consuming me. That delicate line I walk between professional detachment and human instinct wavers dangerously. I am acutely aware that my own moral boundaries are trembling, threatened by the enormity of what I've just heard. Part of me questions whether I should chase after him, demand more, try to unravel the tangled web of his mind. But I know better. Some secrets are not mine to uncover further. Some truths are too heavy, too suffocating to carry in silence. Still, I feel the unseen weight settle further into my chest, like a stone I cannot set down. He's almost out the door now, each step a whisper of finality. I watch him disappear, the echo of his retreat lingering in the stillness. My eyes linger on the closed door, and I sit there, rooted, my mind racing through the implications. What does this mean for me as a therapist? Am I supposed to forget? Or does this moment, this confession, forever stain my perception of human nature? The air seems to hold its breath, mirroring my own internal storm. I am left with a gnawing sense that I've glimpsed the surface of something far darker, a well from which no light escapes. How do I reconcile what I've learned with the oath I swore? To heal, to understand, to remain impartial. I know I am changed, irrevocably. I feel it deep within my bones, the realization that some truths, once uncovered, are impossible to unsee. As I sit there, the room's shadows stretch and shift, and I am painfully aware that the boundary between therapist and witness has blurred beyond repair. I am caught between unwavering professionalism and the undeniable pull of human curiosity, of moral consequence. The silence presses against me, thick and heavy, a reminder that I carry not just my patient's secret, but also the fragile, precarious line that keeps us all from falling into the darkness. And I wonder, how much longer can I hold that line before I, too, am pulled in? As he paused, the silence thickened, pressing into my chest with relentless force. I felt my own moral boundaries quivering, stretched thin by the revelation that had just been laid bare. Every instinct in me screamed to recoil, to judge, to condemn, but I knew I had to hold still, to listen, to process. Yet, beneath that veneer of calm professionalism, a tumult of conflicting emotions roiled. I questioned how much of his story I could bear, how much I should allow myself to feel, and whether the truth itself was a burden too heavy to carry. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, eyes flickering with a mixture of shame and desperation. His voice, trembling now, spilled forth the darkest secret I had ever encountered in a therapy room. He had buried her body in the backyard. The words hit me like a blow, both surreal and inevitable. I felt the room shift, the air thickening, as if the walls themselves were closing in around us. My mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of what I had just heard. An act so heinous, so incomprehensible, yet spoken so casually, as if it were just another chapter of his troubled life. I watched his face, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of humanity beneath the darkness. Instead, I saw only a fractured man, a shadow of guilt intertwined with a strange, numb acceptance. We hesitated before asking, "Do you judge me?" I felt a shiver run down my spine. The question hung in the air, dense and heavy, demanding an answer I knew I couldn't give. How do I judge the unthinkable? How do I navigate the line between empathy and moral outrage in the face of such brutality? My mind darted back to countless sessions, the faces I'd seen, the stories I'd heard, each one peeling back layers of human complexity, revealing that darkness lurks beneath the surface of even the most ordinary lives. But this shattered the boundaries of anything I'd anticipated. I sat there, paralyzed, grappling with the visceral urge to condemn and the equally strong impulse to understand. Is understanding an act of compassion, or is it an invitation to accept evil? As I sat in that charged silence, I felt the weight of my own morality trembling under the pressure. The space between judgment and compassion blurred, and I wondered whether my role was to judge or to merely witness. Could I hold this secret without losing myself? Could I remain impartial, or would the depth of his confession seep into my own conscience, staining my perceptions forever? I thought about the oath I took, to help, to heal, to remain objective. But how could I remain objective when faced with such raw, unfiltered truth? The temptation to recoil, to turn away, was almost overwhelming. Yet I knew I must stand firm, hold the line between understanding and condemnation, even as that line threatened to crumble beneath the weight of this revelation. In that moment, I recognized that my own moral foundation had been tested to its core. The question no longer seemed to be whether I should judge him. No, the real question was how much of this darkness I was willing to accept, how much of it I could carry without losing my sense of self. I felt the fragile boundary between my professional detachment and my innate human curiosity shuddering, threatening to shatter completely. The shadows in the room stretched long and dark, mirroring the depths of my own inner conflict. I felt the ground beneath my mental stability trembling as I wrestled with the moral abyss I had glimpsed. The silence in the room grew oppressive, an almost suffocating reminder that I was now a witness to something far beyond the scope of normal understanding. I wondered if I could maintain my integrity, if I could keep the line between judgment and compassion intact. And yet, beneath all that turmoil, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge. This was not just about his guilt or innocence. This was about the fundamental human capacity for darkness and the limits of my own empathy. How much could I sit with this truth before it rewired my perception of the world? How far could I stretch my moral limits before they snapped? I realized that the real challenge wasn't in judging him, but in resisting the impulse to condemn myself for feeling overwhelmed, for being human in the face of such horror. The line I had once believed to be clear had become blurred, perhaps forever. And in that ambiguity, I understood that my role was not to judge, at least not in the way I once thought. It was to bear witness, to hold space for this darkness, while questioning how much I was willing to accept without losing my own moral compass. As the room settled into an uneasy silence, I knew that I was forever changed. The secret he had entrusted me with was not merely a story or a confession. It was a mirror held up to my own conscience. And I wondered, How long could I stare into that mirror before I saw reflections I might not be prepared to face?